What if everything you believed about your marriage was a lie? The night I discovered my wife's deepest betrayal, I thought I had hit rock bottom, until I realized just how much further there was to fall. There are moments in life that etch themselves deep into our fate, shaping the course of everything that follows. Jake's story is one of tangled relationships, betrayal, and the relentless search for freedom. Through this journey, you'll see how a person can emerge from the darkest chapters of their life, break free from cycles of deception and pain, and step into a future of their own making. It's a testament to the power of resilience and sheer determination. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal so sharp it flips your entire world upside down? I have. The day I uncovered the truth, one so twisted it involved those closest to me, was the day my life as I knew it shattered. My brother-in-law and my wife, the two people I should have been able to trust the most, had woven themselves into a web of deceit. What once was a life built on love and loyalty with Rachel, my high school sweetheart, turned into a landscape of devastation and reckoning. From the innocent days of young romance to the bitter moment of truth in a hotel room in Massachusetts, this is my story. Hello, Sam. It's Jake Callahan. The phone line went dead before I even heard the click. Sam had hung up on me, cutting off any chance for me to speak. Meanwhile, Rachel's furious ranting and relentless pounding on my locked office door echoed through the house. I let out a slow breath and waited 2 minutes before redialing, this time calling Sam and Lisa's home number. Listen, pal, if you call this house again, I'll have the cops on you. Do you understand me? His voice was sharp, filled with manufactured authority. Oh, I understand, Sam, I replied calmly. But here's what you need to understand, I don't care if you call the police. And more importantly, I will speak to your wife whether you like it or not. There's not a thing you can do to stop me. Have a great night. I ended the call with a sense of satisfaction, despite Rachel still hammering at the door behind me. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This had been a day of chaos and revelations, and now, I had one final decision to make. Should I call my sister-in-law's husband? I sat there, deep in thought, reflecting on how it all began. I met my wife Rachel back in high school. I was a junior, sitting with my friends in the bleachers, waiting for the Friday night football game to start. A large group of sophomore girls sat right in front of us, laughing and chatting. As the game went on, we took turns heading to the concession stand. When my turn came, I got up, not thinking much of it, until I realized that a stunning blonde named Rachel had followed me. We both grabbed hot dogs, fries, and sodas, and when we returned, we somehow ended up sitting together. She was bright, funny, and easy to talk to. Best of all, she wasn't dating anyone. Somewhere in the third quarter, someone in our group shouted, "Are we all heading to McDonald's after the game?" The idea was met with near-unanimous enthusiasm, but I saw an opportunity. Taking a shot, I turned to Rachel and said, "I don't know. I'd rather have pizza than greasy fries. Want to check out Tony's Pizza instead?" To my absolute delight, she said yes. Rachel and I started dating on weekends, and within a few weeks, it was clear we really enjoyed each other's company. After 2 months, we made it official. Things only got better from there. Rachel was my date to junior prom, and I swear I felt like I was walking on air that night. I had the most beautiful girl in school on my arm, and for a moment, life was perfect. That feeling lasted, until it didn't. 2 weeks later, on the Monday before senior prom, I was jogging over to the tennis courts for practice. My neighbor, Julie Carter, ran alongside me. She played on the girls' team, so we often crossed paths. Out of nowhere, Julie looked over at me and said something that threw me off completely. "I think you're a really great guy, Jake." I glanced at her, confused. Julie and I had known each other our whole lives, so why did it sound like she was about to say something important? I gave her a puzzled look and asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" Julie smirked and playfully punched my shoulder as we ran. "It's great that you're letting Rachel go to senior prom with Jimmy Barnes. Otherwise, he never would have had the chance to go. You know how quiet and shy he is. Jimmy was a kind guy, reserved, book-smart, and probably somewhere on the spectrum. He lived next door to Rachel, and she had always looked out for him. So, while I wasn't exactly shocked that she agreed to go to prom with him, I was surprised she never told me. By Friday afternoon, I had heard it from half a dozen people, each one praising me for being so mature about the situation. Apparently, they thought it was admirable that I was graciously allowing my steady girlfriend to attend prom with her childhood friend. The truth? I didn't feel mature at all. I felt blindsided. I assumed Rachel would come clean when we met for our usual Friday night plans, but as the hours passed, she didn't say a word. With no other option, I forced the issue. That afternoon, I sent her a text, canceling tonight. Within minutes, my phone was flooded with messages. Texts, voicemails, all from Rachel asking me to call her back. But I didn't. After more than a dozen notifications, I finally responded, "I've known about your prom date since Monday. At least 10 different people told me. Too bad you weren't one of them. I need a girlfriend I can trust, and that's not you." Then I turned off my phone. That was the end of us, at least for the time being. Rachel and I didn't speak again until the start of the following school year. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was walking toward my car in the student parking lot when I saw her. She was sitting on the hood of my car waiting for me. When I approached, she smiled. "Would you let an old girlfriend buy you ice cream at Dairy Queen?" And that was how it started again. For the next 2 years we were exclusive. Even after I left for college in New York City, our relationship survived the distance throughout my sophomore year. During that time I was home often, and I'll never forget that Saturday night in March when I lost my virginity. Rachel and I had been dating steadily since shortly after her 18th birthday, and we stayed together until the following year when she left for college. About 2 weeks into her freshman year, I received a letter from her. The message was clear. College life was exciting and she didn't want to feel tied down. I remember reading it over and over, the words blurring together as I tried to process them. Years later, fate brought us back into the same orbit. I spotted Rachel across the bar, her laughter mixing with the hum of conversation. I watched her from a distance, uncertain if I should approach. Should I follow her when her group eventually drifted toward the parking lot? I hesitated, weighing my options, but then something unexpected happened. When her friends left, she didn't follow. Instead, she turned on her heel, walked straight to the bar, perched herself on a stool and ordered a drink. When it arrived, she casually swiveled her chair, this time facing me. Her gaze dropped to the table as if lost in thought. I smirked as a parade of guys approached her, each one hoping for a shot, only to be swiftly dismissed. It wasn't until she finally looked me in the eye and held up 2 fingers, our old signal, that I excused myself from my group and walked over. Sitting across from my business partner, Tony, I could tell something was bothering him. "So, do you think it's possible we're being tested?" he asked, swirling the ice in his drink. "That they want to see if we're getting too close?" I let out a short laugh. "You know, I actually had the same thought," I admitted, stretching before shrugging. Tony leaned forward. "What do you say we grab a drink and figure this out?" I shook my head, shutting my notebook with a sigh. "I've got over 30 pages of notes to analyze. A drink won't make this any easier." As the man's hand slid lower, gripping Rachel's backside, I raised my camera again, snapping another set of photos. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to remain steady. I tracked their movements, watching as they walked toward the elevator. Click. Another picture. Click. One more as they stepped inside. Just before the doors shut, they kissed. The anger hit me like a freight train. Without wasting another second, I hurried over and checked the panel above the elevator. The light indicated they had gotten off on the 9th floor. A storm brewed inside me, rage, disbelief, confusion. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I cared about Olivia. She was one of my closest friends and her husband, Jake, was my best friend. But I won't lie, I was stunned. Between the grueling negotiations earlier that day and the sheer exhaustion weighing on me, I barely had the energy to process what I had just walked into. Still, I forced myself to stand, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. Before they could take more than 2 steps into the hotel lobby, I was there, phone in hand, camera raised. The flash caught Olivia off guard. At first she looked confused. But the moment I lowered my phone, realization hit her like a freight train. Her face went pale, her jaw slack. I exhaled sharply and said, "I'd normally give you a kiss on the cheek like always. But I don't want to taste your boyfriend on your lips." Her eyes widened. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing here?" "I'm here for meetings." "Why are you here?" She hesitated, clearly trying to compose herself. I watched her swallow hard, forcing a calm she didn't truly feel. "Ethan, Before she could finish, I glanced past her. Jake had just stepped through the hotel's front doors. Without breaking eye contact with Olivia, I added, "If I were you, I'd warn your husband." Jake stopped abruptly, confusion flickering across his face as he turned to look at Olivia. His voice was measured but firm. "Take care of this." Olivia paled even more. She placed a shaky hand on my arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, can we go to the bar and talk over a drink?" For a moment I was tempted. But then I shook my head. "No, Olivia." My voice was calm, but the weight of my words made her flinch. "I already wasted hours waiting for you to wrap up your little meeting." She visibly cringed. I took a slow breath and turned away. I need to get home, have a drink, and figure out where to go from here. Back at my house, I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages. The one I had sent hours ago had been read. So I asked, "Do you know where I've been?" Silence. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Of course you do. You read the message." She had known all along. Without another word, I walked into the den and poured myself a drink, just a couple of fingers of bourbon. I needed something to steady me before I made my next move. I asked over my shoulder, "Then tell me what you mean." When I returned to the kitchen, Rachel was seated at the table, her arms crossed, waiting. "What did you do to upset Olivia?" she asked. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "As far as I know, nothing." Rachel sat up straighter, her voice firm. "Well, whatever happened, it has nothing to do with us. What goes on between you and my sister shouldn't affect our marriage." "Okay, let's see," I said, leaning against the archway and holding up my fingers one by one. "First off, my relationship with Olivia will never be the same. I now know she's a liar. That means every single holiday we spend with your family from now on, I'll be reminded of her deceit. Second, you've made it clear that you knew about her affair all along. So now I'm left wondering, do you approve of it?" "That's not fair, Jake," Rachel cut in. I ignored her. "And third." Before I could finish, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was Scott, Olivia's husband. After a long pause, his voice came through the line, unsteady. "Is she cheating on me?" I took a breath. "Yes." Silence. The kind that stretches, heavy and unbearable. Then a choked sob. "I'll see you in the pit," Scott muttered. The call ended abruptly. For a second, I considered texting him, letting him know I was here if he needed me. But in the end, I chose to leave him alone. Scott knew where to find me when he was ready. As I set my phone down, I realized Rachel had gone quiet. She had been listening, and now she sat there, staring at the table. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to process everything. "How does a man do this to his wife and 4 kids?" she murmured, more to herself than to me. I knew she wasn't looking for an answer, but I gave her one anyway. "I have photos of them checking in at the downtown New Haven Marriott, kissing in the elevator just before the doors closed. Then, nearly 3 hours later, coming back down to the lobby, Jenny wearing an entirely different outfit." The rest of the call was spent exchanging email addresses and promising to send the images in the morning. When I hung up, Rachel let out a long breath. "Jenny told me they have an open marriage," she said finally. I walked past her to the garage, pressing the button to open the door. As I stepped outside, I heard the sharp voice behind me. "What the hell were you saying to Scott?" Jenny demanded the moment I closed the door behind me. I glanced at my wife's terrified face and answered simply, "I was going to change." "I'll be back in a few minutes," I said, turning toward the door. "But let me make one thing clear. If anyone in your family disrespects me in my home, I will throw them out the front door myself. That includes you, Rachel." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked down the hall, heading straight for our bedroom. For a brief moment, I considered the easy way out, climbing out the window and disappearing for a while. But I shook off the thought. I had to face this. Taking a deep breath, I reached for my phone and sent Scott a message. "We need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow when you get home? It's urgent." It wasn't long before my phone buzzed. Scott was calling. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Do you want me to tell you now? Or would you rather meet in person?" "Tell me now," he insisted. I exhaled, steadying myself before delivering the blow. "Rachel is cheating on you." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sharp intake of breath. A few moments later, I heard him sob. He didn't try to deny it, didn't get angry, he just cried. Eventually, through broken words, he confirmed that he'd meet me the next day. I ended the call and stepped back into the living room. The tension was thick. Rachel was crying, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Please just stay out of this." The entire family was visibly shaken, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. But I wasn't about to back down. I turned my attention to Steve, who had been glaring at me the entire time. I knew I had to tread carefully. I didn't want to turn him against me. So I softened my voice, leveled my gaze and said, "Prove it." Steve hesitated. "That's it." I pressed. "You can't prove that Rachel didn't cheat on me." He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, cutting him off. I spent 6 years trusting her completely. Last night, I told her that trust was gone. And you know what? That's not unfair. It's the truth. Scott, meanwhile, wasted no time. He immediately filed for a legal separation from Olivia, though he stopped short of filing for divorce. From that point on, we started having dinner together every Wednesday. Rachel, ironically, kept to the same routine as her sister. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything took another unexpected turn. I was sitting at Clyde's barbecue with a couple of coworkers enjoying lunch, when someone pulled out the empty chair across from me and sat down. Hey, bet you forgot about me," the man said. It took me a second to recognize him. I stared for a moment, my mind racing to place his face. Then, before I could react, he slid a folded paper across the table. I picked it up, my pulse quickening as I unfolded it. Before I could even process what I was looking at, he smirked. "Aren't you going to show this to your friends?" he asked. I shoved the paper into the pocket of my sports coat, my appetite suddenly gone. "I bet they'd love to see pictures and videos of your wife and her sister," Mike sneered, leaning back in his chair, completely at ease with his disgusting revelation. "I've been sleeping with Rachel for over 5 months now. As wild as Olivia is, your wife is 10 times crazier." He chuckled, watching my reaction like a predator enjoying the moment before striking. "I've got video proof, her on her knees, begging me to do things to her that you never could," he continued with a smirk. "She loves being used, man. Like a toy." He laughed again, a sound so vile it made my stomach turn. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, gripping the edges of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The only thing keeping me from knocking him out right then and there was the icy wave of shock washing over me. I left without another word. Back in my office, I shut the door and forced myself to face what I had been given. My hands trembled as I opened the folder and began flipping through the photos. And just like that, every last piece of hope I had shattered. There she was, Rachel, caught in the most degrading, gut-wrenching images I could have ever imagined. Explicit, undeniable, horrifying. Some showed her with 6 different men. Others, a mix of 3 men and 1 woman. And then there was Olivia caught in another set doing the exact same things. The video was worse. So much worse. I felt physically ill. Rachel and Olivia weren't just unfaithful. They weren't just cheating. They were at the center of something so twisted, so obscene, that I knew I would never unsee it. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the evidence of my destroyed marriage, my destroyed life. I had spent years believing I was a happily married man. Turns out I was nothing more than a fool. I took a deep breath, pushing away the flood of thoughts before they drowned me completely. My mind needed clarity, and the last thing I wanted was to spiral into a rage that wouldn't fix anything. So, I did what I always did when I needed to clear my head. I went to the tennis courts. Retrieving the scattered tennis balls one by one, I let the repetitive motion ground me. The rhythm of it, the simplicity helped dull the noise in my head. But as I looked up, I noticed something that snapped me back to reality in an instant. About 100 yards away behind the baseball field bleachers, I saw 5 classmates surrounding a girl, Trish. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what those guys were thinking. And I knew Trish wasn't the kind of girl to be there willingly. Without a second thought, I took off running, reaching them within seconds. By the time I got there, her t-shirt had already been yanked off. She was crying, screaming, desperately trying to fight them off as they clawed at her shorts. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice filled with pure fury. Stan Malloy, the ringleader, turned sharply to face me. His eyes darkened as he took a step forward. "Was this you?" he barked. I gritted my teeth, my fists already clenched. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just stepped between them and Trish, bracing myself for what was about to come next. I had been practicing on the tennis court next to the field when I heard the shouting. Every syllable sent a chill down my spine. He turned to me, fury burning in his eyes. "What did those punks do to her?" His voice was tight with rage, but before he could even finish the sentence, I answered. "When I got there, they had already ripped her shirt off. They were trying to take her pants off. She was still in her bra and shorts." For a moment, silence hung between us. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. If I hadn't been in so much pain myself, I might have been terrified of the cold fire in his glare. "I want their names," he finally said. I didn't hesitate. Stan Malloy and Joey Carter. Instead of going home that night like I had told Rachel, I drove out of town and checked into a Marriott just outside the city. I needed space, distance, a moment to breathe. The first thing I did was call my supervisor and give him a condensed version of my situation. He didn't ask too many questions, just listened and then agreed to let me work remotely for the time being. He assured me that he'd inform my team via email. After the call, I collapsed into the recliner in the corner of the motel room. It wasn't comfortable, but exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I shut my eyes, my mind replaying everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Rachel would be gone for the weekend. She had made that clear before I left. What I hadn't expected was the sheer level of emotion in her reaction. She called nonstop, leaving voicemails, texting relentlessly, pleading for me to pick up. I didn't. Instead, I spent the weekend putting the final touches on my plan. I made a checklist, bought everything I needed, and on Sunday I headed up to the mountains for a long solitary hike. By the time I returned to the hotel that evening, my phone was flooded with missed calls and messages. Rachel. Her family. Even a few of her coworkers. Apparently, my absence had rattled her. She had no idea where I was. And she was desperate to find out. Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur. I kept my distance, ignoring every attempt she made to reach me. But by Wednesday evening she finally had enough. I heard the front door open. Rachel stepped into the house cautiously, her eyes scanning the dimly lit living room. And then she saw me. I was sitting on the couch, watching the flames flicker in the fireplace. A plate of cheese and crackers and an unopened bottle of wine sat on the table in front of me. She hesitated, taking a slow step forward. "Where the hell have you been?" she asked, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, waiting. I held a single glass of wine in my hand. Across the table sat a second glass, untouched, reserved for Rachel. The moment she stepped into the room, she stopped short. Her eyes flickered from the wine to the fireplace, then back to me. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight with unease. I turned my head slowly, the fire's heat pressing against my back. "What does it look like I'm doing?" I had planned a warm welcome for my wife. A moment of clarity before everything came crashing down. For a brief second I saw her expression flicker. Anger, hesitation, maybe even regret. Then just as quickly her fury won. Rachel moved fast. Her hand shot up, and before I could react, her palm struck my face with full force. Pain exploded across my cheek as her fingernails raked into my skin, leaving behind a sharp sting. The impact sent the wine glasses flying. The deep red liquid splattered across my shirt and slacks, soaking into the fabric. She stood there, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling. And then, just as suddenly as she had lashed out, her expression changed again. Tears welled in her eyes. Confusion, panic, maybe even fear. Without a word, she turned and ran upstairs. A second later, I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I sat there, staring at the flickering fire. Despite everything, I already knew my marriage was over. I hadn't expected her to call the police. But she did. By the time the officers arrived, I was calm, composed. I met them at the door, already knowing exactly how this would play out. One of them, an older officer, studied me carefully. "Sir, when we speak with your wife, will we find any damage?" I met his gaze without hesitation. I have never laid a hand on my wife, or any woman, in anger. Ever. One of the younger officers shifted slightly. "Do you have any firearms in the house?" "Yes," I answered plainly. "Several handguns. All locked in a safe in my office. My wife doesn't know the combination." Two officers entered the house, making their way toward Rachel. I stayed put, arms crossed, waiting. That's when I heard another voice, one that didn't belong to law enforcement. "Sir, this is a police investigation. Please step back." I turned toward the open front door. An elderly man stood there, unmoving. He met the officer's command with his own unwavering presence. "I understand," the man said evenly. "But I have something to say." The man stepped forward, his voice steady and firm. "I am an official process server, and I'm here to serve Mrs. Mary Harrington." He marched toward Rachel, who stiffened as all three officers instinctively took a step closer, prepared for any reaction. The process server looked her in the eye. "Are you Mary Harrington?" Rachel hesitated for only a second before giving a small nod. With that, he held up a thick envelope and announced, "Mary Harrington, you've been served." She stood frozen, her fingers trembling as she reached out to take the papers. In addition to the divorce petition, the envelope contained more than she expected. Documents that outlined the evidence of her affair in black and white. There was no denying it now. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with Steve. We had been nursing our drinks in silence for a while, letting the weight of everything settle between us. Then he finally spoke. "She cheated on me too." I just nodded. "Is there any hope?" His voice was quiet, almost pleading. I took another slow sip of my drink, letting the warmth steady my thoughts before I answered. "It wasn't the first time, Steve," I said evenly. "And it wasn't just one man." His brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I exhaled, then told him everything. The full, brutal truth. Rachel hadn't just been unfaithful. Her infidelity wasn't confined to one person or even one affair at a time. Steve's face went pale as he processed what I was saying. Before he could even form a response, my phone buzzed. It was a bright, crisp November morning when I saw the red Ford SUV pull into the parking lot a few spaces away. The driver stepped out carefully, scanning the lot before locking eyes with me. "Hello, Michael." I was sitting on the open tailgate of my Ford F-150, parked right outside Jackson Physical Therapy. I already knew Mike had a 10:30 a.m. appointment. I had been waiting. He walked toward me cautiously, but I didn't move. I just watched him, letting the moment stretch. When he was close enough, I spoke. "My friends will kick their crotches just like they kicked yours." He flinched. I let the words settle for a few seconds before finishing, my tone even, almost casual. "While your mother and sisters are in agony, my pals will make sure they understand that their pain is your fault." Silence. Mike stared at me, the weight of my words pressing down on him. I had his attention now. Mike stared at me for a few moments, his expression unreadable. Then, with a quick nod, he turned and stumbled toward the entrance of the building. I wasn't sure if he was acknowledging what I had said or silently calling for a truce. Either way, I let him go. I should have felt relieved, but instead, a strange anxiety crept in. I just wanted this to be over. I wanted to put it all behind me and move on with my life. Later, as Rachel sat across from me, tears streamed down her face. "I was blackmailed," she sobbed. Mike had threatened to post explicit videos of Olivia online. Her father had mentioned something similar early in the divorce process, so this revelation didn't come as a surprise. "It might have started with blackmail," I said evenly, "but I watched those videos, Rachel. I saw everything." Her face paled. "You weren't just being forced," I continued. "I saw you, heard you. You begged for more. Over and over." Her lips parted as if she was about to argue, but she stayed silent. I exhaled and leaned back. "Do you remember when we first started college? That summer before we made love on a raft on Simpson Lake. We promised to stay faithful. We even agreed to marry after graduation." Rachel wiped her cheeks, still shaking. "And your point?" "My point," I said, "is that your promise lasted 11 days before you broke it." She stiffened, then scoffed. "Are you telling me you were completely faithful in your first year of college?" I shook my head, ignoring the pointless question. "None of that matters now. What does matter is that I've realized something. You never trusted me, and now I have every reason not to believe anything you say. You lie even when there's no reason to." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of printed photos. One by one, I laid them on the table in front of her. The first showed Rachel naked, her legs spread. The second had her on her hands and knees, smiling. The third, more of the same. I didn't need to describe them. She knew exactly what she was looking at. "The bottom line is," I said, my voice cold, "when I think about my future, about the kind of mother my children deserve, the kind of wife I want, I know I need someone better than the person sitting in front of me." I pushed my chair back and stood. "Goodbye, Rachel." And with that, I walked away. A few days later, Rachel was sentenced to 50 hours of community service for the domestic violence incident. It took another 7 months to finalize the divorce. 7 months to reclaim my life.